assessment class for organizing the evening and for bringing this topic to our attention. And also want to thank the Student Government Association and the freshman, sophomore, and junior classes for their sponsorship. I don't know, maybe seniors don't care about grades? Yeah, sorry. They're all studying, they're not here. But thank you for coming tonight. When I graduated from high school years ago, I don't remember exactly what the commencement speaker said, although I do remember one line of his presentation that seemed to get a good laugh. He mentioned that he had graduated with honors when he was in college. He graduated cum laude. And all the parents seemed to laugh at that. None of us high schoolers knew what that meant, but we somehow seemed to think that was funny. The parents enjoyed it a lot. But once I got into college and we started paying attention to grades and graduating with honors and so on, his joke became a little bit more funny, not a whole lot. But we pay attention a lot to grades. I've had students over the years who've come to talk to me about a grade in a class because it affected a scholarship, or they were concerned about getting into graduate school, or they were concerned about staying eligible to play sports or be in Student Government Association. I think we know that grades are important. We also know that they create great deals of anxiety at times. And that's sort of the purpose of our discussion tonight, to talk a little bit about the purposes served by grading, some of the issues that as faculty members we deal with in terms of grading, and hope that we can generate some further discussion on this particular topic. So our format for tonight, Dr. Finney from the Education Department is going to open with a few remarks, partly to set a bit of context, some of the things that she actually talks about with her classes and those students who will be going out of Houghton to do grading, so encouraging them to think about the purposes served by grading. So she'll set a little bit of context, and then we have four other faculty members who are going to present briefly some reactions to some of the things that Dr. Finney has shared and some perspectives perhaps from their own disciplines. And we have a range of folks, so you'll hear from faculty members in a number of different departments that I think will be helpful as well. We've got a couple of questions that will sort of start then some broader conversation, and at the end we'll have some time. So as the conversation sort of unfolds tonight, please be thinking of some things that you may want to ask toward the end of our hour, and we'll try to wrap up by 8 o'clock so that you can get back to study.
My remarks will be outlandish at times to try to just beg the question, although looking at the attendance tonight, I don't think I have to beg the question. But of all the tasks the teacher must juggle, assessing learning and assigning grades is perhaps the most time-consuming for us. We prepare teachers for assessment, for checking to see if students are learning, but we seldom prepare teachers to actually assign specific grades to student work in meaningful and philosophically supportable ways. And so we as teachers develop grading scales or schemes which we believe will be effective, yet this is largely based on what's been done to us. In short, we as a profession have very little informed knowledge about grading purposes and practices. The knowledge is out there, it's just not getting into everyone's hands. We tend to believe if these ways of grading worked for us and we are successful adults, surely they should work for everyone else. But if this were the case, if our approach was really working, then why are we all here tonight? Something clearly isn't working. Tonight, I, along with my curriculum and assessment class, hope to open a discussion that may help us find ways to make grading a better form of communication, both inside and outside the campus community. And we want you to be a part of this discussion. We want you to be a part of this dialogue. But first, there are some basic assessment ideas you probably need to understand if you don't already. One of these ideas is the difference between norm referencing and criterion referencing. Norm referencing is the simple practice of comparing people to each other. Well, criterion referencing involves comparing people's knowledge and ability to a goal we are aiming for. We use norm referencing for class rank, and sometimes for assigning grades by comparing students to one another. We use criterion referencing for finding out if people have learned what they need to know, for instance, when deciding whether someone should receive a driver's license, or when deciding whether simpler levels of math or Spanish have been mastered prior to presenting more complicated stuff. We have to be careful about when and how we use these two practices. For instance, for your first great adventure in skydiving, would you want a norm reference parachute packer or a criterion reference packer? Do you want someone whose knowledge and abilities have reached a critical point of understanding, or someone who is just best in their class, regardless of how untalented and unknowledgeable that class was? Or how about when you're attending a theater production? Would you want the director to be criterion referenced or norm referenced? Based on criteria, the director might announce, the role of Miss Daisy will be left vacant tonight because during rehearsal, no one recited their lines perfectly. No one met the criteria. While the director using norm referencing will put the best cast on the stage every performance regardless. What does this look like in school then? When norm referencing is the idea behind grading, I am communicating that you should value your work by how many people you can beat, more so than by what you know. This is not how I understand Christ's approach to valuing. When James and John came to Jesus and said, we have a request. Let us be your number one and number two guys in this bunch. Jesus basically replied, are you serious? Do you think that that's what this is all about? Competing with each other for a grade and thinking we've done a really great job because we beat a bunch of people is simply missing the point. So there's a little bit about norm referencing and criterion referencing. You also need to know a little bit about the normal curve. Students are now already nervous. The culprit behind norm referencing is something we call the normal curve, aka the normal distribution, or the bell curve. It looks like this. It describes many naturally occurring events, things like the shoe size, or the numbers of friends people have on Facebook, or our height, something like that. Most of us bunch in the middle. We're average, we're typical, and then there are fewer of us on the extremes of the continuum. So how does the normal curve show up in school? The class average on a test, that score that tells you how your test score compares with the rest of the class, that measure is based on the normal curve, what's typical. So are practices like ranking people, finding a valedictorian, or even discovering your IQ or SAT scores, which are both norm reference. I personally would like to know how the normal curve ever got entangled with education. I believe it has single-handedly done the greatest damage to learning of any concept, cause, or condition ever to impact schools. I believe it is worse than lousy teaching. It is worse than inadequate supplies and facilities. It is pervasive and pernicious and leads us down the primrose path to educational doom. We have taken a graph that reflects or describes naturally occurring events and made it into a goal. We have taken what is descriptive of pre-classroom knowledge on a subject and made it prescriptive, as though this is what the outcome of learning ought to be. Where did we ever get the idea that the results of teaching should look like this? On the contrary, our teaching should result in a skewed curve which bunches up on the end of mastery. The skewed curve is the little slower slant there toward the bottom, unassuming and humble, while the normal curve lifts itself up. Yeah, we are so convinced that the results of learning should look like a normal curve, we here being the general world of academia, of which Houghton is a small part, that we have manipulated the grading scale in hopes of yielding results that look like the normal curve. Thus, a small interval for A, a small interval for D, bigger intervals toward the middle. Why aren't these intervals all the same size? The red lines here indicate roughly where the categories are for A, B, C, D, and F on the scale that Houghton publishes in its catalog. This practice is not peculiar to Houghton, but wherever it is found, it is fraught with problems. As a matter of fact, the use of the normal curve for grading makes me want to throw a total tantrum in broad daylight in the middle of the quad.